The smell of burning oak at 20 below zero is something you never forget, especially when 6 months of your winter survival goes up in flames while your HOA president watches from the end of your driveway with a smile on her face. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when the popping sound started outside. Sharp little cracks echoing through the mountains like rifle shots. At first, I thought the cold had finally split one of the old pine trees near the ridge line. Then my dog Ranger lifted his head from the rug and growled low in his throat. That's when I smelled it. Smoke. Thick wood smoke rolling through the seams of my cabin walls. Not fireplace smoke. Not the comforting kind. This smelled bitter. Fast. Wrong. I stepped onto my porch in thermal pants and work boots, and the cold hit me like broken glass against my face. Snow whipped sideways across the valley under the floodlight glow, but beyond the drifting white, orange flames clawed 30 feet into the air behind my equipment shed. My winter stockpile was burning. 6 cords of seasoned oak, diesel reserve barrels, backup heating pellets, generator parts. Everything I'd spent the last 4 months stacking, drying, and covering before the Colorado freeze settled in for good. The fire hissed and roared as snowflakes vanished into steam above it. I could actually hear the wet sap exploding inside the logs. The smell of burned fuel mixed with frozen pine and diesel exhaust until the whole valley tasted metallic. Ranger barked once and took off across the yard while I grabbed the hose mounted beside the porch rail, already knowing it was useless in this temperature. The line had frozen solid sometime before dawn. Of course it had. My boots crunched through knee-deep snow as I pushed toward the flames, heat blasting against my face hard enough to sting my eyes. Then I saw the tire tracks. Fresh. Cutting straight through the snow beside the road. And standing 50 yards away under the white glow of an HOA security vehicle was Linda Carrington herself, wrapped in a spotless cream-colored winter coat, like she was posing for a damn Christmas card. Steam drifted from the Starbucks cup in her hand, while my entire winter reserve collapsed into sparks behind me. Honestly, Ethan, she shouted over the fire, her voice slicing through the wind, that pile was becoming a safety hazard. Safety hazard. That's what she called the only thing keeping my cabin heated through mountain blizzards that regularly buried this valley under 8 feet of snow. Aspen Ridge HOA had spent the last year trying to turn our old working mountain community into some luxury ski development for wealthy retirees from Denver. Heated driveways, designer fences, community wine tastings. And apparently men like me didn't fit the brochure anymore. Men with work boots, diesel generators, stacked firewood, and pickup trucks older than some marriages. Linda hated that my property sat directly uphill from half the subdivision. Hated that my cabin existed before her precious HO ever paved a single road up here. Hated that no matter how many violation notices she mailed me, county law kept proving I was right. But standing there watching sparks swirl into the black mountain sky, hearing frozen wood collapse into itself like bones snapping in the fire, I realized something Linda Carrington didn't understand yet. She thought she'd burned a pile of wood. What she actually burned was the last bit of patience belonging to the man who controlled the water running underneath every single house in Aspen Ridge. People like Linda Carrington always assume quiet men are weak. That is the mistake that gets them in trouble. By sunrise, the fire had burned itself down into a black crater of steam and ash behind my shed. The twisted metal frame of my diesel rack still glowed faint red beneath the snow, and the smell hanging over the valley reminded me of overheated engines and wet charcoal. Ranger sat beside me on the porch while I stared at what was left of 6 months of preparation. Out here in the Rockies, winter is not a season. It is infrastructure. It is planning. It is survival measured in cords of wood, gallons of treated fuel, pipe insulation, backup generators, and how many days you can stay warm when the roads disappear under 10 feet of snow and the power grid starts coughing like an old smoker. Most people in Aspen Ridge did not understand that because most people in Aspen Ridge had moved here recently. Wealthy retirees from Denver. Tech couples from California pretending they loved mountain life until the first blizzard trapped them indoors for 3 days. They saw fireplaces as decoration. I saw heat loss calculations. They saw snow as scenery. I saw frozen pressure lines and emergency shutoff maps. My name is Ethan Walker, 47 years old. Former municipal water systems engineer for Summit County Utilities. 22 years designing emergency water routing through mountain terrain where temperatures dropped fast enough to burst steel. My father taught me pipe welding before I could legally drive. My grandfather dug half the original service trenches feeding this valley back in the late 70s when Aspen Ridge was still cattle land and logging roads instead of million-dollar chalets with heated stone driveways. Every inch of this mountain carried somebody's sweat under the snow, mine included. After my wife Claire died during the winter freeze of 2018, I stopped trusting comfort. A drunk driver slid through black ice on Highway 9 while she was driving home from Breckenridge Medical Center during a storm warning the county ignored. One bad night. One frozen road. One state plow delayed by 40 minutes. After that, I learned something important. Systems fail. Weather does not care about optimism. Since then, preparation became routine for me the same way brushing your teeth becomes routine for everyone else. Every August, I stacked oak behind the shed. Every September, I tested the backup generator. Every October, I inspected the pressure regulators feeding the lower valley lines. Quiet habits. Mountain habits. The kind rich people laugh at until the temperature drops below zero, and their designer gas fireplaces stop working. Aspen Ridge HOA hated those habits. Linda especially. She moved here 4 years ago after selling luxury condos in Scottsdale, and immediately started talking about elevating community standards. That woman could turn the word community into a threat. Suddenly there were newsletters about visual harmony, new regulations, about equipment visibility, rules about wood stacks, utility trailers, fuel storage, outdoor piping, and exterior maintenance aesthetics. A week after becoming HOA president, she sent me a violation notice because my backup propane tanks were visible from the road. I framed that one and hung it in my garage. The second notice came because Ranger barked at one of her landscaping contractors. The third claimed my equipment shed created a negative visual impression during property tours. Property tours, like the whole valley, existed to increase somebody's resale value. Meanwhile, Linda drove around in a white Range Rover with custom snow tires and enough heated leather inside to survive a small ice age. But here is the funny thing about people who worship appearances. They almost never understand the machinery hidden underneath them. And underneath Aspen Ridge, buried deep below frozen dirt and old granite, was machinery I knew better than anybody alive. 3 days after the fire, Linda Carrington came to my cabin pretending to apologize. That was the first moment I realized just how confident she had become. Snow drifted across the valley in slow white sheets, while her Range Rover crawled up my gravel road like a glossy magazine ad dropped into the wilderness by mistake. I was splitting fresh pine beside the shed when she stepped out wearing white leather gloves and fur-lined boots that had probably never touched mud in their entire existence. The cold air smelled like chain oil and fresh sap from the logs at my feet. Ranger immediately planted himself between us with his ears pinned back. Smart dog. Linda smiled anyway. That woman always smiled like she thought the world was a sales meeting. "Ethan," she said softly, brushing snowflakes from her sleeve. "I just wanted to stop by and say how terrible the accident was." Accident. Funny word choice considering the county fire inspector had already told me traces of accelerant were found near the burn site. I kept swinging the maul into the chopping block without answering. The crack of splitting would echo through the trees between us. "The HOA board is very concerned about safety hazards this winter," she continued. "Actually, we are preparing updated compliance guidelines regarding fuel storage, external structures, and visual maintenance." There it was. She could not even fake sympathy for 30 seconds before turning it into another power play. Steam rolled from my breath while I stacked another split log beside the porch rail. "You burned 6 cords of oak to improve curb appeal?" I asked. Her smile tightened for half a second. Tiny little cracks in the mask. "Now, Ethan, nobody is accusing anyone of anything. But you do have to admit your property creates a certain image problem for the community." Community. Always that word. Like she owned the mountains because somebody printed bylaws on expensive paper. Linda glanced toward my equipment shed where the old pressure gauges and pipe fittings hung on pegboards beside spare valves. "Honestly, this place looks more like an industrial yard every year." I finally looked directly at her then. Snow blew sideways between us while the wind rattled the metal roof overhead. "That industrial yard kept your pipes from freezing last January." Silence. Just the groan of pine branches bending under fresh snow. Because that was the truth nobody in Aspen Ridge liked talking about. Last winter, when temperatures dropped to -27 and half the subdivision lost water pressure, I spent 40 straight hours crawling through utility tunnels and frozen valve pits, keeping the lower valley feed lines alive. Not because the HOA asked politely, because if those lines froze solid, repair costs would have buried the entire county for months. Linda crossed her arms tighter against the cold. Well, the board has already approved new property enhancement measures for spring. We are bringing in consultants from Denver. Aspen Ridge needs modernization if we want premium buyers. Buyers. There it was again. Every sentence from her eventually circled back to property values like a shark returning to blood in the water. She did not see homes. She saw listings. She did not see mountains. She saw investment potential. And she definitely did not see people like me as neighbors. To her, we were leftovers from an older version of Colorado that rich people preferred to photograph rather than live beside. Before getting back into her vehicle, she paused near the edge of my driveway and lowered her voice. You know, Ethan, eventually this valley is going to move forward whether you like it or not. Then she drove off through the snow with heated seats, heated steering wheel, heated mirrors, and absolutely no understanding of what actually kept heat flowing through this mountain during winter. I stood there listening to the distant hum of her engine disappear downhill, while the wind pushed smoke sent from the burned stockpile across the yard again. And somewhere underneath 40 inches of frozen ground below us all, water kept moving through pipes my grandfather helped build. The next attack came wrapped in certified mail and expensive legal language. That is how people like Linda Carrington operate. They smile in public, then hide knives inside paperwork. I found the envelope frozen halfway into my mailbox 2 mornings after her little visit to the cabin. The metal door squealed open under a layer of ice while snow swirled across the road in silver ribbons. Ranger waited beside the truck watching the tree line while I tore the envelope open with numb fingers. Even before reading the first sentence, I could smell fresh printer ink and attorney office cologne all over it. Official Notice of Property Compliance Enforcement. 43 pages. 43. Somebody in Denver had billed a small fortune putting together a document designed to bully one mountain man into submission before spring. New emergency HOA measures. Immediate removal of all external fuel reserves. Mandatory demolition review for non-compliant utility structures. Fine starting at $500 per day. Additional penalties for environmental risk violations. Environmental risk. Coming from the same people who somehow accidentally burned half my heating reserve into smoke 3 nights earlier. I stood there beside the mailbox reading through the pages while freezing wind scraped snow across the asphalt like sandpaper. Half the language did not even make legal sense. They cited county ordinances that did not exist anymore. Claimed authority over easements outside HOA boundaries. Tried redefining my equipment shed as a commercial utility structure, even though the county had approved it 15 years ago. The entire thing read like somebody threw real estate jargon into a blender with panic and entitlement. But buried near the back was the line that finally made me stop walking. Aspen Ridge HOA hereby reserves the right to conduct independent infrastructure inspections on adjacent properties affecting community utility performance. I read that sentence 3 times while the cold stung tears into the corners of my eyes. Infrastructure inspections. Adjacent properties. Community utility performance. Linda was fishing. She did not know exactly what sat underneath my land yet, but somebody had clearly told her enough to make her curious. That night the temperature dropped to -14. The wind screamed through the valley hard enough to shake frost loose from the cabin windows while I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by old utility maps, county permits, and maintenance logs. The soft hum of the propane heater mixed with the ticking sound of cooling pipes inside the walls. Ranger slept beside the stove while snow hammered the roof overhead like gravel. I pulled out records I had not touched in years. Original Summit County routing diagrams. Pressure zone layouts. Emergency bypass schematics dating back to 1978. Most people would have seen stacks of yellow paper and engineering notes. I saw memory. I saw my father kneeling in frozen trenches welding steel joints under floodlights. I saw my grandfather cursing broken compressors during blizzards while drinking burnt coffee from a thermos older than me. Those men built survival systems before luxury developers discovered mountain views could be sold for 7 figures. Around midnight I found the old survey overlay folded inside a cracked leather binder. My pulse slowed the second I opened it. There it was. The lower gravity-fed emergency line running directly through my property before splitting into Aspen Ridge's residential pressure network. One line. One buried valve junction. One original easement agreement signed. Decades before the HOA even existed. And according to the attached county renewal records, the legal maintenance access still belonged to the Walker Family Trust. Not Aspen Ridge HOA. Not Summit Luxury Holdings. Not Linda Carrington and her little suburban kingdom. Mine. Outside, the storm kept building strength. Wind rattled the cabin walls while somewhere downhill thousands of gallons of water moved silently through pipes underneath expensive homes full of people who had absolutely no idea how fragile comfort really was. Once you understand where the pipes run, you stop looking at neighborhoods the same way. Most people see houses, fences, Christmas lights, and property values. I see pressure zones, shut-off points, freeze risks, and weak joints buried under frozen dirt. And after finding those old easement records, I finally understood why Linda Carrington had become so obsessed with my land. She did not know the full truth yet, but somebody inside county planning had clearly whispered enough to make her nervous. The next morning proved it. I woke up before dawn to the grinding sound of diesel engines outside my cabin. Not snowplows. Heavier. Slower. Ranger was already barking before I even pulled on my coat. Frost coated the inside corners of the bedroom windows while the smell of machine exhaust drifted through the vents. I stepped outside into gray morning light and immediately saw two contractor trucks parked near the lower access trail beside my property line. Men in reflective jackets stood around portable floodlights while a compact excavator idled near the snowbank. Steam rolled from the machine like breath from some giant metal animal. And standing beside all of it with a clipboard tucked under one arm was Linda. Of course it was. "Morning, Ethan," she called the second she noticed me walking downhill. "Emergency infrastructure inspection." I looked past her toward the excavator tracks cutting through fresh snow near the utility easement entrance. "You brought excavation equipment for an inspection?" Her jaw tightened slightly. Tiny movement. Barely visible. The board received reports about potential maintenance concerns involving underground service. Access. There it was again. Service access. Somebody had definitely started digging through old records. I crouched beside the easement marker buried under snow near the fence line and brushed enough ice away to expose the faded county stamp underneath. The metal plate was older than Linda's entire real estate career. "You are standing on private utility access property," I said calmly. "Without written authorization." One of the contractors suddenly looked uncomfortable. "Smart man." You could practically hear the mood shift underneath the idling engine noise. Linda stepped closer, boots crunching sharply against the ice. "The HOA legal team disagrees." I almost laughed at that. Legal teams love paperwork until they meet older paperwork. "Did your legal team explain what happens when unauthorized excavation occurs near active gravity-fed municipal bypass lines?" Silence again. Wind pushed loose snow through the trees while the excavator hummed beside us. One contractor actually took 2 slow steps backward away from the trench marker. "Also smart." Linda crossed her arms tighter. "You are intentionally obstructing community maintenance." "No," I replied. "I am preventing amateurs from accidentally shutting off water to 300 homes in the middle of January." That landed. I watched her eyes flick for half a second toward the utility path disappearing downhill under snowdrifts. She knew enough now to realize this was bigger than firewood complaints and aesthetic violations. But pride is a dangerous thing, especially in people addicted to control. Instead of backing down, she doubled down exactly like I expected. "Fine," she snapped. "Then we will handle this through county enforcement." She spun around and marched back toward the trucks while freezing wind whipped her scarf sideways across the white snow. The excavator shut down a minute later. One by one the contractors packed equipment back into their trucks and rolled downhill out of sight. But before leaving, one older worker lingered near the road long enough to mutter something quietly as he passed me. "Might want to check county filings this afternoon." Then he drove away too. By noon I was sitting inside the Summit County Records office with melted snow dripping off my boots onto old tile floors while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The clerk handed me a fresh filing packet less than an hour old. Aspen Ridge HOA had officially petitioned for emergency control authority over all community-adjacent utility infrastructure, due to alleged safety concerns. Linda was not trying to annoy me anymore. She was trying to take control of the entire system. The funny thing about county records is that rich people rarely read them until they become dangerous. Linda Carrington probably thought filing a petition would pressure me into backing down quietly before spring. Instead, she handed me exactly what I needed: a paper trail. I spent the next 2 days buried inside old engineering archives while another storm crawled across the Rockies. Outside the county building, snow piled against parked trucks in dirty frozen waves while wind rattled the windows hard enough to make the fluorescent lights flicker overhead. The record's basement smelled like dust, cold concrete, and ancient printer toner. Half the filing cabinet still carried handwritten labels from the 1980s back, when county engineers actually built things instead of outsourcing everything to consultants wearing polished shoes. I sat there hour after hour flipping through brittle easement maps and maintenance contracts, while my coffee went cold beside stacks of rolled utility diagrams. And slowly, piece by piece, the real picture started coming together. Aspen Ridge was never supposed to become a luxury subdivision. 40 years ago, the lower valley had been considered too unstable for large-scale development, because winter pressure fluctuations kept freezing municipal supply lines every few seasons. My grandfather solved that problem by building a private gravity-fed bypass route running downhill through our property using natural elevation pressure from Walker Ridge Reservoir. It was old-school mountain engineering. No expensive pumping stations. No electric boosters. Just elevation, steel pipe, and gravity. Reliable. Quiet. Hard to notice unless you understood infrastructure. The county signed an emergency easement agreement with my family in 1979 after a brutal freeze knocked water service offline for almost 12 days. According to the original contract, the Walker family retained ownership of all bypass control infrastructure, while granting conditional emergency water access to the county during winter emergencies. Conditional. That word mattered. My pulse slowed when I found the final attachment buried behind a stack of inspection reports. A renewal amendment signed in 2004. The county transferred operational oversight responsibilities directly to the Walker Ridge Trust after budget cuts shut down the old maintenance division. My name sat right there in black ink beneath the authorization line. Ethan Walker. Emergency Utilities Supervisor designation. I leaned back in the metal chair listening to the ventilation system hum above me, while snow tapped softly against the basement windows near the ceiling. Linda had no idea what she was trying to seize control of. Aspen Ridge HOA was not connected to some giant municipal grid like Denver suburbs. Their heated driveways, luxury kitchens, stone fireplaces, sprinkler systems, and oversized mountain bathtubs all depended on a winter bypass system routed through my land and legally maintained under my authority. And then I found the final piece. A county emergency compliance clause stating unauthorized excavation or modification near gravity-fed bypass infrastructure triggered mandatory suspension review until full environmental inspection cleared the system for safe operation. I actually laughed out loud in that empty basement. Not because it was funny, because it was beautiful. Linda's little excavator stunt near the easement line had already activated the exact legal mechanism capable of freezing her entire petition dead in place. All I had to do now was file the paperwork properly. Outside, the storm had intensified by the time I drove back up the mountain. Snow hammered the windshield while the truck heater blew dry air smelling faintly of old dust and engine oil. Halfway up the ridge, I passed Aspen Ridge glowing warmly beneath fresh snow like some luxury winter postcard. Golden lights shining through. Giant windows. Smoke curling from expensive chimneys. SUVs parked neatly beside heated garages. People inside drinking wine beside gas fireplaces completely unaware that the comfort surrounding them rested on aging steel lines buried underneath my property. And somewhere in one of those oversized homes, Linda Carrington was probably celebrating because she thought she was winning. She had no clue that by trying to grab control too aggressively, she had just walked directly into the oldest rule in mountain infrastructure. Never threaten the man who understands where the water comes from. Real power is quiet. That is something men working around infrastructure learn early. Water does not care who talks the loudest at HOA meetings. Pressure does not care about luxury vehicles or polished smiles. Steel pipes only respond to physics, maintenance, and paperwork filed correctly. So while Linda Carrington spent the next week flooding Aspen Ridge message boards with complaints about dangerous utility negligence and irresponsible property owners, I stayed home and started building my case. Every morning before sunrise, I sat at the kitchen table beside the wood stove with county maps spread across old pine boards while rangers snored near the heater vent. Outside, temperatures kept dropping. -16, -19. One night the valley hit -24 with wind strong enough to whistle through the metal roof seems like a tea kettle. The mountains looked beautiful in that brutal kind of way winter sometimes does. Ice covered the pine branches so thick they glittered blue beneath moonlight, and every breath outside felt sharp enough to scrape your lungs raw. Meanwhile, Aspen Ridge kept pretending comfort was permanent. Heated driveways melted perfect curves through the snow. Decorative lanterns glowed beside luxury stone walkways. Expensive fireplaces flickered behind giant windows while residents complained online about snowplow delays and frozen package deliveries. Nobody down there understood how thin the line really was between convenience and disaster. On Tuesday morning, I drove into town and filed 3 documents with Summit County Utilities Enforcement. First, a formal notice of unauthorized excavation activity within protected bypass infrastructure boundaries. Second, an emergency environmental compliance review request under the 2004 Maintenance Amendment. Third, a temporary suspension recommendation for all non-certified access activity near Walker Ridge bypass controls pending inspection clearance. Calm, professional, legal. No threats, no drama, just signatures and county stamps. The clerk behind the counter actually blinked twice after reading the file references. "Wait," she said quietly, looking back up at me. "Aspen Ridge runs through the Walker bypass?" I simply nodded once. By noon the county engineer called me directly. Harold Benton, 63 years old. Smelled permanently like black coffee and radiator fluid. I worked under him years ago before retirement swallowed half the department. "Ethan," he muttered over the phone, "please tell me those idiots did not bring excavation equipment near line 12. The fact he called it line 12 immediately told me he understood exactly how serious this was. "They brought a compact excavator within 30 feet of the upper easement marker," I answered. Long silence. Then one exhausted sigh. Jesus Christ. By Thursday afternoon, Orange County notices appeared at every Aspen Ridge utility access point. Temporary infrastructure review pending environmental safety inspection. Restricted access until clearance approval. The panic started almost immediately. HOA board members flooded county offices demanding explanations. Residents complained about delayed maintenance requests. Heated driveway systems tied into auxiliary water loops began experiencing pressure inconsistencies because scheduled inspections were frozen during the review period. Nothing catastrophic yet, just inconvenience. But winter mountain systems do not tolerate delays for long. That evening Linda showed up at my cabin again just after sunset. This time she did not smile. Snow blew hard enough across the ridge to blur the headlights from her Range Rover into pale yellow fog behind her. She marched up the porch steps with frozen anger radiating off her like static electricity. "Did you file those county complaints?" she demanded before I even opened the screen door fully. I could smell expensive perfume mixing awkwardly with freezing air, and wood smoke from the stove behind me. "I filed legally required infrastructure notices," I replied calmly. Her face tightened instantly. "You are disrupting an entire community over a misunderstanding." I almost laughed hearing that word again. Misunderstanding. Like she had not spent months trying to crush me with fines, threats, inspections, and eventually fire. The wind howled across the ridge while snow swirled around the porch light overhead. "No, Linda," I said quietly. "You disrupted your own community the second you tried taking control of systems you did not understand." For the first time since all this started, I finally saw it in her eyes. Fear. The blizzard hit Aspen Ridge on a Friday night just after 7 o'clock. You could feel it coming hours before the first snow even touched the ground. The air changed. Heavy. Metallic. The kind of pressure shift mountain people notice in their bones long before weather alerts start screaming across television screens. By sunset, the wind was already hammering the valley hard enough to shake loose powder from the pine trees in giant white clouds. I stood on my porch tightening the collar on my canvas jacket while Ranger paced circles beside the steps. The sky looked almost green over the ridgeline. Bad sign. Real bad sign. Then the snow came sideways. Thick. Fast. Relentless. Within an hour the gravel road disappeared under drifting snow, and visibility dropped so low the lights from Aspen Ridge below looked like blurry gold smudges trapped inside a snow globe. Inside the cabin, the wood stove cracked softly while coffee steamed beside my elbow and county inspection documents sat spread across the kitchen table exactly where I left them. Calm. Warm. Prepared. The way winter is supposed to feel if you respect it properly. Around 9:30 my phone buzzed for the first time. Then again 30 seconds later. Then non-stop. Pressure loss warnings. Emergency maintenance requests. Utility alerts from residents inside Aspen Ridge. I muted half of them and kept reading. Because here is the thing nobody tells wealthy people about mountain infrastructure. Small problems become massive problems fast once temperatures fall below zero. And that night temperatures were falling hard. -22 by midnight. The county infrastructure review had frozen all unauthorized maintenance access pending inspection clearance, which meant Aspen Ridge contractors could not legally touch the bypass control systems until county engineers completed environmental verification. Exactly the process Linda herself triggered with her excavation stunt. Around 11:15 the first auxiliary driveway heating systems failed from pressure instability. Not dangerous yet. Just inconvenient. But once water flow fluctuates during deep freeze conditions, expansion stress starts building inside older sections of pipe. Tiny weak spots become ticking clocks. By midnight residents started posting online videos of frozen sprinkler manifolds and pressure alarms echoing through utility rooms. Heated guest houses lost water first. Then exterior garage loops. Then half the eastern cul-de-sac reported pipe hammering so loud it sounded like someone hitting walls with sledgehammers. I knew exactly what was happening beneath the snow. Pressure surges. Frozen bypass restrictions. Aging luxury expansion systems never designed for mountain temperatures this extreme. Systems I warned the county about years ago before Aspen Ridge started overdeveloping every inch of the valley. The first actual pipe rupture happened at 12:43 in one of the newer vacation homes near the lower ridge. I only knew because the owner posted security footage online showing water blasting through a garage wall, while alarms screamed in the background. By 1:30 the county emergency office officially declared partial infrastructure stabilization protocols and requested temporary voluntary water conservation across the subdivision. Translation: panic quietly before things get worse. And they got worse fast. At 2 in the morning someone pounded on my cabin door hard enough to rattle the windows. Ranger exploded into barking before I even stood up from the table. I opened the door and freezing wind immediately blasted snow across the floorboards. Linda Carrington stood there wrapped in a white parka dusted with ice crystals, her perfect hair ruined by the storm for the first time since I met her. Behind her, the valley below flickered with scattered emergency lights glowing red through blowing snow. She looked exhausted. Smaller somehow. Human. "Ethan," she said, voice shaking from cold and fear. "The county cannot clear the inspection until tomorrow afternoon. We are losing pressure across half the subdivision." I said nothing. Just listened to the wind screaming across the ridge behind her. She swallowed hard before speaking again. "Please." That word hung in the freezing air between us like steam. And for the first time since this entire mess began, Linda Carrington finally understood something every old mountain family learns eventually. Winter does not care about status. It only respects preparation. People think justice feels loud when it finally arrives. Sirens. Courtrooms. Somebody screaming while cameras flash. Truth is, real justice usually sounds quieter than that. Sometimes it sounds like wind moving through pine trees while arrogant people realize too late they built their comfort on top of someone else's foundation. Linda stood frozen on my porch while snow blasted sideways around us hard enough to erase the road behind her completely. The valley below flickered with emergency lights glowing through the storm like scattered embers under ice. I stepped aside from the doorway and let her inside without a word. The cabin smelled like oak smoke, coffee, and warm steel from the old stove. Ranger settled near the heater again while melting snow dripped from Linda's boots onto the floorboards. She looked exhausted now. Gone was the polished HOA president who strutted around Aspen Ridge issuing fines over mailbox colors and stacked firewood. Standing in my kitchen was just a frightened woman realizing nature does not negotiate with bylaws. The county says the stabilization review could take another 12 hours, she said quietly, wrapping frozen hands around the coffee mug I handed her. Some homes already lost exterior water service completely. I nodded once because I already knew. The emergency pressure alerts had been buzzing on my phone all night. What exactly do you need from me? I asked. Her eyes shifted toward the utility map spread across the table. For the first time since this whole mess started, she answered honestly. Help. Silence settled between us except for the crackling stove and wind scraping snow against the windows outside. Then I walked over to the old filing cabinet beside the workbench and pulled out the original bypass control binder my grandfather kept updated until the year he died. The leather cover was cracked from decades of cold weather and grease-stained hands. Real work leaves marks like that. The county review stays active, I said calmly while flipping through the maintenance diagrams. I am not overriding safety compliance. Linda immediately tensed again. But, I continued, the emergency bypass agreement allows temporary manual stabilization adjustments under certified operator supervision during active freeze conditions. She blinked twice. Meaning, I said, grabbing my coat from the chair. If pressure keeps dropping at the current rate, half your subdivision is going to burst pipes before sunrise unless someone manually balances the lower bypass valves. The drive down to the utility access tunnel took 20 brutal minutes through waist-deep snow and zero visibility conditions. My old truck groaned the entire way while wind hammered the frame hard enough to shake the mirrors. Linda sat silently in the passenger seat, clutching the emergency flashlight like it was a life raft. When we finally reached the lower access hatch, the storm sounded like a freight train roaring through the mountains overhead. We climbed down into the maintenance tunnel beneath Aspen Ridge where the air instantly changed from freezing wind to damp concrete and the low metallic hum of moving water. Linda stopped cold when she saw it all. Massive steel valves, pressure gauges, original Summit County routing plates bolted into concrete walls. The entire hidden skeleton keeping her luxury mountain paradise alive. My grandfather built half this system by hand, I said quietly while adjusting the primary balance wheel. Back when people respected infrastructure instead of trying to rebrand it. For the next 3 hours I manually stabilized pressure flow across the lower bypass network, while county engineers monitored remotely from town. Slowly, one neighborhood at a time, pressure levels returned to normal. Heated systems restarted. Pipe alarms stopped screaming. Water flow stabilized before the deep freeze could finish the damage. By sunrise the storm finally began breaking apart over the mountains. Golden light spilled across fresh snow while steam drifted from rooftops all through Aspen Ridge below us. A week later the county officially denied the HOA petition and fined Aspen Ridge for unauthorized infrastructure interference. Linda resigned 2 days after that. Most residents never even learned the full story. They only knew the county dissolved several HOA enforcement powers and converted utility oversight into a resident-managed mountain infrastructure co-op instead. Funny enough, a few neighbors even helped me rebuild my winter stockpile after the storm passed. Quiet people. Working people. The kind who understand survival is not something you outsource. As for Linda, I heard she moved back to Arizona by spring. Last I saw of her was a moving truck disappearing down the mountain while snow melted off the pines around Aspen Ridge. And every time I walk past the rebuilt wood stacks beside my cabin now, I still think about that night she stood freezing on my porch asking the same man she tried to destroy for help. Turns out the water running beneath her perfect little community never cared about power, money, or HOA authority. It only ever cared about who understood how to keep it flowing.